case of the Harvey family. On that Sunday afternoon in January 2006, a man and his daughter visited his friend's family home for a New Year's gathering. He found the open door a usual party thing. Entering, he saw thick smoke, alerted others, and called the authorities. Firefighters arrived, put out the fire, but tragically found the Harveys' lifeless bodies. What seemed like a fire turned into a murder investigation, leaving the investigators both shaken and perplexed. 49-year-old Brian Taba Harvey, a local icon, gained recognition in the 1980s as the singer-songwriter for the underground indie band House of Freaks. Despite parting ways professionally with his musical partner, Johnny Hott, in the 90s, they remained close friends. Brian, a devoted musician, took the stage for the last time at a New Year's Eve show, which was sadly and unbeknownst to him, the final night of his life. On the other hand, 39-year-old Catherine Elizabeth Grabinski achieved success as the co-owner of the popular toy store World of Mirth, located in Richmond's Carytown district. A community pillar, she was an artist involved in various endeavors, from painting sets for community theater to working as a pastry chef and waitress. Catherine had an older sister, Shelley Grabinski, and was also the half-sister of actor Stephen Culp, known for his roles in The West Wing and Desperate Housewives, among other films. The paths of Brian and Catherine crossed at the Border Cafe on Main Street, where Catherine worked and Brian frequently visited with Johnny. In 1990, they got married, and the House of Freaks released an album featuring a song dedicated to Catherine titled, I Got Happy. The couple welcomed 2 daughters into their lives, Stella and their first daughter, born in 1996, and Ruby May, born in 2001. While Brian continued his musical pursuits, he also took on a job working on computers for the Henrico County school system. Catherine, on the other hand, embarked on the entrepreneurial path by opening World of Mirth, a unique toy and gift store that became a cornerstone in the fashionable Carytown neighborhood. Her brother, Stephen Culp, explained in court that she wanted to create a space where parents could come with their kids and spend time, and kids could play with the toys without any toys that resembled weapons such as guns or swords. The Harvey family established their home in a stately old neighborhood on the south side of Richmond with large trees, porch swings, and ivy-covered surroundings. They had a family room in the basement of their 2-story red brick house. The beautiful family was well known and beloved in the community of Richmond, and no one really had bad intentions towards them, or so everyone thought. On New Year's Day, Sunday 2006, Brian, his wife Catherine, and their 2 daughters, 9-year-old Stella and 4-year-old Ruby, anticipated a bustling day ahead. Their plans included hosting a lunchtime barbecue for friends and family, prompting them to rise early and make preparations for the upcoming festivities. It had become a tradition for them to throw a party every New Year's Day, gathering their extensive circle of friends for the occasion. On that Sunday morning, Brian went outside their residence in the fashionable Woodland Heights area of Richmond, Virginia, to retrieve the newspaper. Absorbed in the front page news, he returned indoors without locking the door. Since they lived in a relatively safe neighborhood, this wouldn't normally have been a cause for concern. Typically, they also didn't secure the door on party days, leaving it open for arriving friends. However, on this day, unbeknownst to Brian, opportunistic criminals were secretly lurking nearby. Catherine was busily preparing cookies in the kitchen for the anticipated guests who were expected to arrive shortly. Suddenly, she heard voices emanating from the living room. Assuming someone had arrived earlier than expected, she approached the living room, only to be confronted not by familiar faces, but by 2 unknown men. In the tense moments that followed, Brian, Catherine, and young Ruby were directed to go downstairs to the basement playroom. Stella, who had spent the previous night at a slumber party, had not yet joined them. Once the family was confined to the small space, the intruders used electrical cords and packing tape to restrain them, ensuring their cooperation to prevent any harm as the intruders proceeded to ransack the house. Around 10 a.m., a knock on the front door interrupted them. The apparent leader of the group released Catherine from her restraints and instructed her to deal with whoever was at the door. However, before allowing her to leave, he issued a stern warning. If she sought help or attempted to escape, her daughter and husband would be murdered, as the imminent arrival of Stella was threatened. A distressed Catherine found herself in a difficult dilemma. Answering the door would expose her daughter to the same danger as the rest of the family, while ignoring the persistent knocking could incur the wrath of the assailant, who clearly had the upper hand. Ultimately, she decided that cooperation was the most prudent choice, and with that decision she opened the door. In an unexpected turn of events, Stella swiftly darted past Catherine and made her way directly to the playroom where the family usually spent a lot of time together. Acting quickly, Catherine intercepted her daughter's friend, preventing her from following. Karen Perkinson, the friend's mother, later recounted her surprise at Catherine's unusual behavior, which deviated from her typical exuberance. In response to Perkinson's inquiry about her well-being, Catherine, normally lively, claimed to be unwell and gestured with a circular motion to the side of her head, mimicking a gun, to indicate someone might be considered crazy, abruptly ending the conversation and shutting the door. This peculiar gesture would later trouble Perkinson, who wondered if Catherine was attempting to convey that Kathy was being monitored by the intruders. And could she have attempted an escape, potentially saving herself and Stella? However, the dilemma of leaving Brian and Ruby behind weighed heavily on Catherine's mind. Perkinson left, intending to return later for the party. With all 4 members of Harvey's family now inside the house, Catherine went back to the basement and found a terrified Stella, who had been securely tied up along with the rest of the family. As everyone lay bound and vulnerable, chaos suddenly and unexpectedly erupted. The man in charge revealed a knife taken from the Harvey's kitchen and began slashing their throats, including those of the young girls, expressing frustration that they were not dying quickly enough. He ordered his accomplice to bludgeon their heads, but the partner refused, prompting the assailant to grab a claw hammer and ruthlessly strike them repeatedly until they stopped moving. After removing Catherine Harvey's wedding ring, the assailants used wine as an accelerant to set the room on fire and conceal evidence of their heinous acts. As they made their escape from the residence, they helped themselves to a plate of freshly baked cookies that were cooling on the kitchen counter and stole a laptop, DVD player, and various other items. Rushing out, they entered a getaway vehicle parked outside, where a woman who was in a relationship with one of the men was serving as a lookout during what was initially intended as a simple robbery. They quickly departed, leaving the scene as inconspicuously as they had arrived. Sometime later, around 1:30 p.m., Johnny Holt arrived for the celebratory gathering. Upon opening the front door, he was greeted by a dense cloud of smoke pouring out, alarmed by the strong smell of burning. He alerted the neighbors, who quickly called 911. As emergency responders entered the premises and dealt with the fire, they unfortunately found 4 bodies in the smoldering basement, still intact. Investigators at the scene soon determined that the fire did not cause the victims' deaths, but rather a more sinister cause of death was uncovered. This had now become a murder investigation. Police officers and paramedics, who were accustomed to witnessing the darkest aspects of humanity, were reportedly so distressed by the harrowing scene that some of them openly shed tears. The revelation that the parents had been forced to witness the brutal deaths of their children and vice versa was heartbreaking to imagine. Autopsies revealed that Brian and Catherine died from blunt force trauma to the head. Stella tragically succumbed to a combination of blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, suggesting she was alive when the fire started. Despite her severe injuries, Ruby's death resulted from stab wounds to her neck and back. Despite initiating an immediate investigation into the murders, the authorities had little evidence. Recognizing the potential for criminals to divulge information, they appealed to the public for assistance. And fortunately, their breakthrough came a few days later on January 6th. A woman named LaToya Pye contacted the police, requesting them to perform a welfare check on her friend, 21-year-old Ashley Basil. Pye expressed her concerns as she believed that Ashley's boyfriend, 29-year-old Ree Joseph Dandridge, and his uncle, 29-year-old Ricky Javan Gray, were involved in the murder of the Harvey family. Ricky, who was slightly younger than his nephew by a few months, was said to be the one in charge. The shocking revelation continued, as Pye disclosed that the 2 men had stored evidence of their crimes at her residence. She revealed that Gray and Dandridge had recently visited her home with a laptop that had an image of the Harveys as its wallpaper. And the Harvey case had by then received extensive coverage in the news, leaving no doubt that the laptop belonged to them. Additionally, LaToya provided detailed information about a plan devised by Ashley, Gray, and Dandridge to rob Ashley's parents. In this plan, Ashley was supposed to pretend to be a hostage, allowing Ricky and Gray to extort money from the Bossy Tuckers, which would make Ashley appear innocent, even though she was aware of the entire plan and had been offered a role. LaToya declined, becoming suspicious of the trio. The uncle and nephew were the only ones that returned hours later, and when asked about Ashley's whereabouts, they cryptically replied, "Ashley has gone bye-bye." This statement heightened LaToya's concerns, prompting her to contact the police. It was this crucial information that investigators needed to start connecting the dots. Having confirmed LaToya's information, investigators proceeded to the residence where Ashley resided with her mother, 46-year-old Mary Basil Tucker, and stepfather, 55-year-old Purcell Tucker. To their horror, they encountered yet another gruesome scene. Upon entering the home, they discovered the lifeless bodies of all three victims who had been subjected to a brutal method similar to the Harvey family's fate. The victims were bound, gagged, and had their throats mercilessly slit. Duct tape wound tightly around their heads had inflicted additional suffering on Mary and Purcell, who both displayed deep neck lacerations. Purcell had a sock forcibly inserted into his throat, and Ashley tragically was found to have been suffocated with a plastic bag. The common cause of death for all three was determined to be suffocation and torture. Suspecting the presence of killers, law enforcement agencies from across the region collaborated in a joint effort to apprehend them before they could commit further atrocities. Harvey Purcell and Mary led quiet, peaceful lives without any known enemies. Purcell worked as a forklift operator, while Mary was employed by a housekeeping business. Their tranquil existence was shattered by the betrayal of their own daughter, which ultimately led to the tragic demise of an innocent couple who was simply trying to enjoy their retirement years. The investigators swiftly uncovered the crucial link between the Harvey and Tucker cases. Ashley was found wearing Brian Harvey's wedding band, the same one that was missing and taken from Catherine. With this revelation, urgent action was imperative to apprehend Gray and Dandridge before they could inflict further irreparable harm. They traced their movements back to their home state of Pennsylvania, and Gray and Dandridge were captured in Philadelphia on January 7th. In questioning, Dandridge asserted that the murders had been conceived by his uncle, and he had merely followed instructions. Faced with these incriminating accusations, readily admitted to the killings of the Harveys and his involvement in those of Ashley and her parents. While these straightforward confessions were enough to leave anyone astounded, it became apparent that this was just the beginning. Gray provided gruesome, intricate details of both family massacres, emphasizing that their actions were driven solely by the need for money. During the Harvey family murders, unbeknownst to everyone, was under the influence of PCP, a drug known for inducing auditory and visual hallucinations, as well as violent behavior. Throughout his confession, Gray maintained a chilling, emotionless stare, and his utter indifference towards the lives he took led investigators to believe they were face to face with the devil incarnate. It was also revealed that Gray was responsible for the murder of his wife, Trevor Terrell Gray, whose body was uncovered in a shallow grave on Brookside Avenue in Washington, Pennsylvania. The couple had been married for 6 months prior to her tragic murder and resided together in a house owned by Trevor's family along with Gray's nephew, Rory. According to Trevor's parents, the Grays frequently engaged in bitter arguments, and claw marks on Rye's forearm were even discovered on the day Trevor's body was found. Despite being interviewed by Washington police, neither Gray nor Dandridge were initially considered suspects. Trevor's mother, Maina Squires, alleged that law enforcement assumed Trevor had succumbed to a drug overdose, leading to a lackadaisical investigation into her death. Although Trevor's demise was deemed suspicious at the time, a homicide investigation was only initiated after Gray's confession in 2006. On December 31, 2005, a brutal assault unfolded where 26-year-old Ryan Kai was attacked by 2 men in front of his parents' Arlington home, who were later identified as Gray and Dandridge. The assault left Kai with severe beating and stab wounds to the chest, neck, and arms, resulting in a near-fatal assault that caused him to spend the following 2 weeks in a coma and permanently lose the use of his right arm. On February 9, 2006, Ricky Gray faced 5 charges of capital murder, while Ray Dandridge was indicted on 3 counts of murder for his involvement in the Baskerville Tucker killings. Despite their earlier admissions, both men pleaded not guilty. After a 6-month trial, the jury found Gray guilty on all counts, leading to a life sentence for the murders of Brian and Catherine Harvey. In response to the brutal taking of Stella and Ruby's lives, the court deemed nothing less than a death sentence appropriate. In September 2006, following his uncle's conviction, and after learning the verdict in his case, Dandridge opted for a plea deal to evade the death penalty. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In December 2006, Ricky Gray faced charges from Chesterfield County for the murder of Cheryl Warner, a 37-year-old legal secretary and mother of 3. Warner was discovered shot and hanged by an electrical cord in the basement of her Burning Beaver residence. Gray entered a not guilty plea. However, on June 4, 2008, the charge was suspended due to conflicting evidence. Over the subsequent 9 years, Gray's legal team pursued numerous appeals, primarily arguing that their clients suffered from diminished capacity due to an abusive childhood. The case reached the Supreme Court, where it was summarily rejected in 2016. In November 2016, Gray was scheduled to be executed on January 18, 2017. On January 18, 2017, with all of his appeals exhausted, Ricky Gray was executed by lethal injection. Greensville Correctional Center. Ray Dandridge remains incarcerated at Sussex State Prison. The brutal murders of the Harvey family unleashed an overwhelming wave of horror and sorrow, with over 1,400 individuals attending their memorial service, expressing their condolences and grief. Flowers and dolls piled up and formed a poignant tribute along the curb outside the red brick house. Children placed candles which maintained their glow for weeks. A neighbor reflected on the community's collective mourning, stating that they kept those candles lit for weeks. Catherine's brother, Culp, testified about the profound impact of the murders, describing them as a lightning bolt to the heart that felt bottomless. He further expressed his pain in thinking about the Harvey family's last hours. In Richmond's Forest Hill Park, an entrance to a footbridge is adorned with a granite monument, a poignant dedication to the Harvey family. This family, who had previously enjoyed many joyful moments at the site, saw their lives abruptly and tragically cut short. A bronze plaque depicting their radiant smiles serves as a commemoration of happier days before the unfathomable evil infiltrated their lives, devastating everything in its wake. It is a sad and unfortunate tale, and our thoughts are with the victims, whose lives were tragically cut short, and the loved ones they left behind. 79-year-old Viola Hagencord lived alone in an apartment in Anaheim, California, 1980. On February 18, 1980, a neighbor of Viola became concerned about her whereabouts. Viola was often seen walking around the apartment complex, but she hadn't been seen for 2 days. The neighbor stepped inside Viola's unit and found her lifeless body. She had been assaulted and strangled. Over the years, detectives attempted to solve the case, pursuing new leads or bits of evidence, but failed to identify a suspect, and the case went cold. In September of 2020, the case was reopened. This time, investigators turned to genetic genealogy, which has been used to solve hundreds of cases across the U.S. Investigators used DNA found on Viola and compared it with genetic profiles on genealogy databases. This led investigators to 64-year-old Andre William LePere. He was arrested on April 28, 2021, at his home in Alamogordo, New Mexico, in connection to the case. He is being held without bail at an Otero County jail. It is not believed that Andre and Viola knew each other. Viola's family had this to say in a statement: "Our grandmother, Viola, was a beautiful, happy soul and did not deserve being violated in her final years of life. We are so grateful for the Anaheim Police Department never giving up after 41 years. That is our message: never, never give up." LePere was in his 20s at the time of the crime and lived close to Viola in Anaheim, California. Sometime in the 1990s, he moved east. He split his time between Arizona and New Mexico. LaPera worked as a plumber and a truck driver. He married twice and had 2 children. Investigators had not established a motive for the crime. In February of 2022, LaPera was convicted for the crime. He will be sentenced on May 13th. 21-year-old Pertina Epps lived in Inglewood, California in 2005. On April 26th, Pertina's body was found lying in a carport in Gardena, California. Someone was backing out of one of the 4 stalls in the carport and then discovered her. A medical examiner determined that she had been strangled. Investigators found fingerprints that did not belong to Pertina on her purse. There was also DNA from a man at the crime scene. They theorized that it belonged to the person that ended her life. Technology was not advanced enough for them to identify the culprit. Investigators could not find other useful leads, so the case went cold. In 2021, investigators took another look at Pertina's case. They resubmitted forensic evidence from the crime scene using new technology. This led them to 56-year-old Charles Wright. He was arrested on January 27, 2022. Wright denied involvement in the crime. He said his fingerprints were on Pertina's purse because he sold it to, according to him, at the time he was selling purses, tennis shoes, and clothing from the trunk of his car. Wright had a harder time explaining away why his DNA was found at the crime scene. Wright has been working as a teacher since 1999. He said he resigned from Inglewood Unified School District to fight the case against him. This is what he had to say. "I didn't do this. The thing is, everybody that knows me knows that I used to sell bags and clothes out of my car. That's the only possible way could happen." He said he believes people who purchased bags from him during that time period could confirm his story. County Administrator Erica F. Torres, head of Englewood Unified, told staff and parents in a letter dated Saturday that the district learned of the accusation the day before and that Wright would no longer be teaching at any of its schools. Wright is scheduled for arraignment on June 28, 2022. Authorities said that anyone with information regarding the case can anonymously contact Crime Stoppers at this number. It is not known yet why Wright did what he did, but investigators did say that they don't believe Wright and Pertina knew each other. Case of Jolene Cummings. The disappearance of 33-year-old Jolene Cummings shocked even seasoned detectives. Jolene, a mother of 3, lived in Fernandina Beach and was going through a divorce from her husband Jason. While Jolene and their children resided in a Fernandina Beach house, Jason moved to a neighboring city and had weekend visitations with the kids. Jolene worked as a hairdresser at Tangle's Hair Salon. On Saturday, May 12, 2018, Jolene worked until 5 p.m. The next day, Mother's Day, was also her 34th birthday. Her children had spent the previous days with their father. As agreed, Jolene was to meet Jason on Sunday in Hilliard at the Winn-Dixie supermarket parking lot to pick up the children. Jason brought the kids, but Jolene failed to appear. All attempts to reach her by phone were unsuccessful. Her mother and Johnson, who wanted to wish Jolene a happy birthday, couldn't contact her either, as all calls went straight to voicemail. After trying to reach Jolene to no avail, Jason contacted and to inquire about the children. Upon learning that Jolene hadn't picked up the kids, and grew concerned, as this behavior was unusual for her daughter. When and couldn't get in touch with Jolene on Monday, May 14th, she filed a missing person report with the police. The authorities promptly launched an investigation, releasing a poster with Jolene's photo and issuing an all-points bulletin for her 2006 Ford Expedition. And Johnson made a public plea for help in finding her daughter, urging anyone with information to come forward. Jolene's disappearance was devastating for Anne, and she begged anyone with knowledge to report it. On the same day, police and volunteers searched the forest near Jolene's home. Their efforts were unsuccessful. The salon where Jolene worked was closed on Sunday and Monday. The police discovered that Jolene was last seen on Saturday, May 12th, when she left work. According to the salon's owner, Jolene and Jennifer, another hairdresser, were scheduled to work together that day. In a phone call, Jennifer told her boss that she and Jolene closed the salon at 5 p.m. and each drove away in their own cars. Police determined that Jolene last used her phone to make an outgoing call while still at work on May 12th. Nassau County Sheriff Bill Leeper appealed to anyone who was a customer of Tangle's salon or in the area on May 12th to contact the police. Jolene's relatives and friends didn't think she was hiding on her own accord. The owner of the salon, where Jolene had worked for 6 years, shared their skepticism. It was hard for them to believe that she would abandon her children. The police were determined to uncover at least one lead, so they delved into Jolene's personal life. As spouses often become hostile during divorce and child custody disputes, they took a closer look at Jason. Meanwhile, detectives found that just 5 days before Jolene vanished, a neighbor had reported a loud argument to the police. It emerged that Jolene had been fighting with her ex-boyfriend, Jason G., and their children were witnesses to the altercation. He had asked Jolene if he could stay with her for a while, but she refused. Enraged, he began vandalizing everything in sight. The reason for her refusal was that the police were actively searching for Jason due to his parole violations. By the time the police arrived, Jason had managed to flee the scene. After Jolene disappeared, Jason G. became a person of interest in the police investigation. 2 days into the investigation, on May 15, 2018, the police found Jason G. hiding in Jolene's house, where he had been since the day Jolene's neighbor reported a loud quarrel to the police. He was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. During the conversation, Jason G. claimed he was not involved in Jolene's disappearance. Meanwhile, the police discovered their first crucial lead. They found Jolene Cummings' SUV parked outside a Home Depot hardware store, just a few miles from her workplace. The vehicle was undamaged and showed no signs of a struggle. On May 15th, the police visited the salon where Jolene worked, as it was the first working day after a 2-day break. They arrived at 10 a.m. to speak with Jennifer Cyber, an employee who claimed to be the last person to see Jolene and to have closed the salon with her before the weekend. However, Jennifer failed to show up for work, citing an urgent matter in another city. CCTV footage provided crucial clues about Jolene's disappearance. The footage revealed Jolene's car entering the parking lot of a hardware store, where the police later found it. Notably, Jennifer Seibert had stated that she and Jolene closed the salon at 5 p.m. on May 12th. But the CCTV footage showed Jolene's car arriving at the hardware store at 1:17 a.m. on May 13th, a time gap of 8 hours and 17 minutes. Jennifer visited a gas station across the street from her location. Surveillance footage from the station reveals that she entered the premises, purchased a bottle of water, and requested an employee to call a taxi for her, which later took her to her workplace, a salon. The gas station employee reported to the police that Jennifer appeared agitated and had fresh facial abrasions. As a result, Jennifer Seibert became the primary suspect in the investigation, and the police launched a search for her. Upon verifying the address she provided when applying for her job, the detectives discovered it was fictitious. Jennifer attempted to evade capture, but her efforts were unsuccessful. On May 16th, patrol officers spotted a black Kia Soul belonging to Jennifer parked in a recreation area between 2 trucks, approximately 50 meters from her salon. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officers found Jennifer asleep inside. They arrested her and initially charged her with stealing Jolene Cummings' car. When the police took her to the station, detectives noticed the abrasions on her hands and face and asked her to explain how she got them. She said she had been bitten by bed bugs. The police found out that she didn't have a permanent place to live, mostly sleeping in her car and using a shower at a fitness center. After her arrest, the investigators made a surprising discovery. Jennifer Seibert wasn't her real name. Her real name was Kimberly Kessler, born in 1968, and she had been reported missing in Pennsylvania in 2012. The name Jennifer Marie Seibert belonged to a 13-year-old girl who died in a car accident in Germany in 1987 and was buried in Butler Cemetery, Pennsylvania. During a videotaped interview 48 hours later, Kimberly Kessler, seated on a couch and wearing an orange jumpsuit, calmly revealed her true identity. For over 25 years, the police investigation into the case revealed more about Kimberly Kessler's past. It emerged that she had begun using other people's names in 1996 while living in Pennsylvania. Since then, Kessler had used at least 18 aliases and lived in 33 cities across 14 states. Many of these names were similar, and she had taken at least half of them from gravestones and cemeteries, later obtaining fake documents to support these identities. One of the identities she used was Jennifer Seibert. In 2012, Connie Kessler, Kimberly's mother, contacted the police to report her daughter missing, despite not having heard from her since 2004. This delay in reporting her daughter's disappearance, 8 years after losing contact, suggests that the family relationships were strained. Pennsylvania police investigated Kimberly Kessler's disappearance and determined that she was voluntarily missing, but the reasoning behind this conclusion is unclear. It is unknown whether a further investigation was conducted. Had the police found her, they likely would have discovered that she had assumed someone else's identity. Several questions remain unanswered. Why did Kessler flee, and why did she use multiple aliases? According to Connie Kessler, her daughter faced numerous challenges, including an abusive relationship with a man in 2004. Kimberly gave birth to a son, Evan, but when the relationship ended, the father took custody and prohibited Kimberly from seeing her child. The father later relocated to another state and falsely told Kimberly that their 1-year-old son had passed away. Kimberly sought to uncover the truth and locate the grave of her son. Frustrated by the lack of answers, she began searching for Evan and investigating his fate. Connie Kessler theorizes that her daughter used aliases to conceal her identity, fearing Evan's father. According to Tim Edwards, Evan's father, the circumstances were different. He claims to have had a relationship with Melissa McKernan between 1997 and 1999, resulting in the birth of their son, Evan. Melissa allegedly used fake names to keep her family, including her mother, from finding her. After the couple separated, Melissa retained custody of Evan, denying Tim visitation rights. In 1999, when Evan was around 15 months old, social services intervened, taking Evan away from Melissa, who then fled the city, disappearing from Tim's life. Tim never informed Kimberly that Evan had passed away since he lost contact with Melissa after she left, and never heard from her again. Later, when Jolene vanished, Evan was 20 years old and had never seen a picture of his biological mother, until FBI agents visited their home in 2018 to gather information about Kimberly Kessler's past. However, there are inconsistencies in these stories. According to Tim Edwards' birth certificate, Evan was born in 1998, but in her interview, Connie Kessler claimed Kimberly gave birth to Evan in 2004. This discrepancy suggests that Connie Kessler was not well informed about her daughter's life, and her statement about Tim hiding Evan from his mother may not be reliable. As a result, Connie's theory that her daughter used the identities of deceased individuals to find her son and avoid detection by his father is questionable. Moreover, Kimberly was unable to provide coherent reasons to the detectives about why she needed to use multiple names. Now let's revisit the Jolene Cummings case. After uncovering the fact that Kimberly Kessler had been living under assumed identities, the police brought forgery charges against her. A storage unit rented by Kessler was searched, yielding several significant finds, including 4 wigs, a bag containing 2 severed hairtails, and 3 mobile phones. However, the most critical piece of evidence was the discovery of Jolene Cummings' DNA on Kessler's sock and shoe. Furthermore, during a search of Kessler's vehicle, the police found scissors with Jolene's DNA on them. Notably, the blue plastic containers found at the scene were proved to be important later on. The phone seized from Kessler revealed a disturbing search history. It suggested that what happened to Jolene Cummings was not an accident, rather something Kessler had been preparing for. On April 30th, 2018, at 3:36 a.m., Kessler searched for information on a man who was charged with murder after his co-worker's remains were found in his yard. This was followed by a search on May 8th at 1:37 a.m. for cases where a co-worker was found guilty of murder, but the body was never found. Later that day at 7:13 a.m., Kessler searched for advice on injecting and how to use a tourniquet. She also looked up a list of female murderers by country on a website called Murderpedia, as well as a list of female murderers in Florida. Finally, she searched for information on autopsy and postmortem changes at 6:33 p.m. The owner of the hair salon where Jolene worked reported that the plant in the pot inside the salon had been replaced. This draws attention to Kessler's search queries on May 13th, the day Jolene failed to pick up her kids. At 12:05 p.m., Kessler searched for indoor palm and then variation palm tree. A minute later, at 12:06 p.m., the police examined CCTV footage from a hypermarket selling household goods, located a few hundred yards from the Tangles hair salon. The footage showed Kessler arriving at the hypermarket on May 14th at 2:39 p.m. and leaving the store half an hour later with a plant, which would later end up at the hair salon on May 15th at 6:13 p.m. 2 days later, on May 16th at 6:27 p.m., Kessler searched online for Jolene Cummings' "I have vanished and no body, no crime." Forensic experts used luminol and ultraviolet light to investigate the hair salon, and their findings suggested that a serious crime had taken place there. The entire room glowed under the ultraviolet light, indicating the presence of blood or other bodily fluids. On May 22nd, the sheriff held a press conference during which he announced, "We have gathered sufficient evidence, although some of it will remain undisclosed for the time being to protect the ongoing investigation. Sadly, our evidence leads us to conclude that Jolene Cummings has likely died." The investigators learned that, about a week before her disappearance, Jolene shared her suspicions with a colleague at the Tangle salon. She thought their new hairdresser, Jennifer, was hiding something and wasn't being genuine. According to some salon clients, the relationship between Jolene and Jennifer was strained. One client even witnessed a heated argument between the two women on May 9th, just 3 days before Jolene vanished. The Tangle hair salon closed its doors on June 5, 2018. Despite Kessler's attorneys managing to keep some evidence under wraps, the police released information sheds light on what happened to Jolene Cummings. However, a surveillance camera near the back of the building captured footage of the dumpster. Kessler was seen there at least 4 times. The recording shows Kessler doing something near the dumpster. Later, at 8:08 a.m., she returns to dispose of a white garbage bag. Based on how she lifts the bag, it appears to be quite heavy. 14 minutes later, she throws out another white bag. In the 4th recording, taken an hour before midnight, Kessler is seen lifting a waste container to empty its contents, suggesting that it holds something heavy. The Walmart camera footage provides insight into what Kessler threw away. The recording shows her purchasing items at the self-checkout, including garbage bags, cleaning agents, latex gloves, and notably an electric knife. This discovery significantly impacted the police's subsequent actions. In July 2018, investigators discovered that a local waste management company had been dumping trash in a Georgia landfill. A team of nearly 200 people combed through the landfill for a week, yielding several crucial leads. Although the sheriff refused to disclose them to protect the integrity of the investigation, near the dumpster, where Kessler had discarded the white garbage bags, police recovered a piece of jewelry, women's shoes, and a blue plastic container. Notably, the container was identical to one found in Kessler's storage unit, and it tested positive for Jolene Cummings' DNA. While Jolene's body remained unfound, the accumulated evidence was sufficient to warrant Kessler's arrest for her murder. On January 17, 2019, Kimberly Kessler made her first court appearance, entering a not guilty plea. However, the trial was delayed for several years due to the judge's concerns about Kessler's mental stability. During this time, Kessler engaged in a hunger strike, which left her weighing under 88 pounds. Her court appearances were often marked by outbursts of anger. Before the 2021 court session, Kessler underwent compulsory treatment, which ultimately deemed her fit to stand trial. On December 9, 2021, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and on January 27, 2022, Kessler was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The prosecution believes Kessler's motive was to silence Jolene Cummings, who threatened to expose her lies during a press conference. Sheriff Leeper expressed satisfaction with the verdict, stating that Kessler would spend the rest of her life in Florida State Prison. Unfortunately, Jolene Cummings' body was never found. On November 6, 1994, human remains were found in the Wright Township near Coopersville in Udoa County, Michigan. The The remains were found by hunters. An autopsy revealed that the remains belonged to a woman. Could not be determined how she lost her life, but foul play was suspected. Investigators asked anyone with information to come forward. They also took a look at missing persons to see if there was any link. They were not able to find her actual identity, so they referred to her as Matilda. Later, she would be known as Utah County Jane Doe 1994. In 2007, the Utah County Sheriff's Office exhumed the remains and were able to collect DNA. A DNA profile of the victim was then created. She could not be identified, however, because her DNA was not in the combined DNA index system used by the FBI. Recently, the Utah County Sheriff's Office partnered with the DNA Doe Project to identify the Jane Doe. The DNA Doe Project uses forensic genealogy to identify victims of crime, matching victim DNA to living relatives' DNA in various DNA databases. Recently, using that process, they identified the woman as Shelley Ray Keppert. She also went by the name Shelley Ray Christian. She was 29 years old when she went missing in 1993. She lived in Hennepin County, Minnesota, near Minneapolis, but was last known to be in Grand Rapids in February 1994. Utah County Sheriff's Office Captain Jake Sparks said that Shelley Ray's mother and her children are still alive. Sparks hopes that now the victim's name and photo has been released, investigators can backtrack to see who she was with, why she came to Michigan, and hopefully who she was associating with. Until you know whose death you're investigating, it's very, very difficult to do an investigation, Sparks said. Maybe we have someone who steps forward and says, yes, I knew her. An old roommate or coworker who can provide some answers, and we can try to drill down into it and figure out who was in her life at that time. None of that can really start until we have her name. Anyone with any information about the investigation or knew Shelley Ray is asked to contact the Utah County Sheriff's Office or Silent Observer at 1-877-888, Silent 745,368, or mozotips.com. Shelley Ray was known to wear unique glasses, as can be seen in one of the photographs. She may or may not have worn them near the time that her life was taken. 35-year-old Helen Cardwell lived in Chicago in 1992. She had recently moved from New Jersey and was due to start work at Lutheran General Hospital. On November 8, 1992, Helen's sister and brother-in-law came to visit her, but when they entered her room at the Leaning Tower YMCA in Cook County, they discovered her lifeless body. She had been strangled. Investigators collected DNA from the crime scene that belonged to the person that took her life. Detectives worked the case until 1993, but the case went cold due to lack of investigative leads. In late 2020, investigators reopened the case. They submitted numerous pieces of evidence to the Northeastern Illinois Regional Crime Laboratory in Vernon Hills. The DNA of those samples matched the DNA of Richard J. Sisto. Sisto lived close to Helen at the time her life was taken. He was on parole for a 1977 assault case in Dallas, Texas. Investigators had trouble finding Sisto after the DNA match in late 2020. Then, in August of 2021, a police database search revealed that Sisto was in jail in Texas on a 2006 parole violation warrant. Cook County detectives then traveled to Texas. There they interviewed Sisto and took a DNA sample. After some more DNA tests, it was confirmed that he was indeed the one that took Helen's life. Sisto was later brought back to Illinois to face the charges against him. It was announced to the public. At the public announcement, Helen's sister, Noka Irvin, spoke. "I'm so grateful they decided to reopen this case, and I just appreciate everyone's effort in solving it." 72-year-old Sisto was taken to the Cook County Jail on November 24, 2021. Frustratingly, he passed away in late January 2022. The cause has not been revealed yet. Before Paul met Joanne, he had been in serious relationships with women more than once. For example, in 1993, during his university years, he was with Carrie Thompson. Although he didn't stay with her for long, this relationship revealed his violent tendencies. Carrie told the police about how Paul could switch during an argument and become aggressive, beating the walls and holding Carrie by force. This was just the beginning. In 1999, Jenny Mary Clark appeared in his life. They wasted no time, and just 2 weeks after meeting, the wedding bells were already ringing. However, their marriage began with a real nightmare. On their wedding night, Paul attacked Jenny, and this was not a one-off incident. He continued to beat her and even strangled her into unconsciousness. Investigators claimed that this abusive behavior was repeated with Joanne. Despite this situation, Paul and Jenny decided to have a baby. Their daughter, Chloe, was born in 2000, and they divorced shortly after. When Chloe was 5 years old, Jenny met Joanne and immediately realized that Joanne was too naive for such a rude man and would face a tough battle with Paul. In 2002, he broke up with Jenny and began dating Joanne Nelson. Katie, Joanne's sister, said that Joanne most likely did not know about his criminal history. Otherwise, she would not have continued the relationship or wanted children with him. Their story began on the streets where Paul worked as a security guard in bars and clubs. He was 27 and already experienced in relationships, while Joanne was just starting her journey into adulthood at the age of 19. Despite the age difference, they found support in each other, running away from their parents' control and looking for their own space. At first, they lived with Paul's mother, and then they could afford to buy their own house. But happiness was slowly disappearing, fading away like smoke from a fire. The days turned gray and the tension grew between them. For Joanne, everything had become too mundane and boring. Their differences began to affect the relationship. She loved order while he did not give it much thought. On February 14, 2005, Joanne did not come to work. This was unusual and caused immediate concern. As the investigation revealed more and more information, the previously quiet and peaceful town was overtaken by a wave of shocking lies and deception. Joanne Nelson, a cheerful and bright young woman, always put the happiness of her loved ones above her own. As a child, she lived with her parents in the town of Hull, also known as Kingston upon Hull, on the east coast of Yorkshire, England. Her mother, Jean, was a teaching assistant, and her father, Charlie, worked as an engineer for the city council. It was in this town that Joanne grew up and became who she was. Joanne had a bright personality and was successful both academically and socially. She was an active athlete who loved netball, lacrosse, and swimming. She lived happily, enjoying her youth, but always harbored a deep desire to create her own family. She initially tried her hand at medicine, but the emotional toll of being a nurse proved too difficult for her. Her loved ones remember how she would come home saddened by the suffering of her patients. Later, Joanne considered working abroad, but ultimately chose to work at an employment center in Hull to be closer to her family and friends. She found fulfillment in making people's lives better by helping them find jobs and improve their skills. Joanne's dedication and kindness left a lasting impact on those around her, making her absence even more profound and alarming. When she did not show up for work that fateful February day. On Valentine's Day 2005, Joanne Nelson vanished without a trace, turning a day meant for love into a day of horror and mystery. Her disappearance was a nightmare for her parents. When her boyfriend reported her missing to the police, a sense of foreboding filled the air. That night turned dark and ominous, leaving Joanne's family and friends enveloped in fear and uncertainty. Instead of enjoying the evening with his beloved, Paul found himself speaking with the police. He claimed that the last time he saw Joanne was when she was asleep, and upon his return from work, she was gone. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving only shadows of fear and hope behind. At 22 years old, Joanne's sudden disappearance caused great distress among her loved ones. The situation became even more perplexing. When she missed significant events, such as her best friend's father's funeral and her sister Katie's 19th birthday, the police swiftly launched a large-scale search operation involving numerous law enforcement officers, military personnel, and volunteers. Joanne's father was vocal about his suspicions regarding Paul, questioning how he could be involved in the disappearance of such a responsible young woman. Katie, although aware of her father's concerns, found it hard to believe that Paul had any role in Joanne's vanishing. The family's worry and confusion only deepened as days turned into weeks without any sign of Joanne. Paul threw himself into the search efforts, collaborating with volunteers, concerned relatives, and friends. Despite lacking family consent, he granted multiple interviews to the press, keen to aid in the search. When questioned by a reporter over the phone, Paul vehemently denied any wrongdoing in Joanne's disappearance. He adamantly professed his love for her, asserting that he could never harm her. However, discrepancies emerged between his spoken words and his facial expressions. Expert Cliff Lansley scrutinized Paul's demeanor during a televised interview, identifying peculiarities. Notably, Paul failed to close his eyes while discussing Joanne, an anomaly for someone grappling with grief. Moreover, he displayed no signs of tears, raising suspicions. Further scrutiny came from Ray Higgins, the head of the investigation team at Humberside Police. Higgins reported observing nail marks on the back of Paul's hand, leading authorities to consider his potential involvement in Joanne's disappearance or death. Eventually, Paul's mother, unable to bear the emotional turmoil any longer, divulged crucial information about Paul's actions to the authorities, potentially shedding light on Joanne's fate. Upon learning of the accusations, Paul didn't attempt to refute his culpability. Just 6 days after Joanne's disappearance, he found himself in police custody. During a grueling interrogation, the truth emerged. On that fateful Valentine's Day in 2005, Paul committed the unthinkable act of ending Joanne's life in their own home. Paul recounted a tumultuous argument that escalated to irreparable heights. Joanne's constant criticism, particularly regarding household chores, served as the catalyst. According to Paul, Joanne's request for help with the washing machine triggered his anger and shame at his perceived inadequacy. Matters worsened when Joanne declared her intention to leave him and demanded the sale of their home for €110,000, further fueling Paul's rage. In a fit of fury, Paul confessed to the police, admitting to strangling Joanne with his bare hands. Subsequently, he displayed chilling composure as he meticulously orchestrated the aftermath, intending to conceal his heinous deed. He craftily devised a plan, seeking to fabricate Joanne's sudden disappearance. With calculated precision, Paul proceeded to carry out his scheme. He engaged in casual interactions with neighbors and discussed banal topics like acquiring a pet, all while concealing the darkness within him. Surveillance footage captured his unervingly composed demeanor as he purchased supplies, a testament to his disturbingly calm facade. Armed with garbage bags, rubber gloves, and disinfectant spray, executed his plan methodically. He bound Joanne's limbs, encased her in bags, and sealed them with duct tape. Then, without hesitation, he transported her lifeless body to her vehicle, his audacity matched only by the magnitude of his crime. The audacious act unfolded in broad daylight, revealing Paul's cunning and deceitful nature. With chilling composure, he concealed his heinous deed from unsuspecting onlookers, demonstrating his ability to manipulate those around him effortlessly. After concealing Joanne's lifeless body in her own vehicle, Paul embarked on a calculated journey. Driving approximately 75 miles to the remote Bradbury woodland near Winteringham in North Yorkshire, Paul carefully orchestrated each step. With meticulous precision, he carried Joanne's body through the dense forest, seeking a secluded burial site among the towering pines. Utilizing twigs to obscure the makeshift grave, buried what he perceived as the love of his life. Returning to the victim's car, Paul resumed his facade of normalcy, showing no remorse or acknowledgement of his monstrous actions. He even fabricated a fake phone conversation with Joanne to divert suspicion, further highlighting his cold-blooded demeanor. Despite his attempts to deceive, Paul's consistent actions betrayed an alarming level of planning and premeditation. In the subsequent investigation, Paul's memory conveniently faltered regarding the exact location of Joanne's burial site. Detectives, led by the tenacious Ray Higgins, embarked on a painstaking 6-week search across 3 counties. Finally, on March 24th, after 39 days of agonizing uncertainty, the grim truth came to light. In a solemn operation led by Detective Phil Gadd, Joanne's remains were discovered in Bransby near York. Trembling with nerves, the search party followed Paul's descriptions until they stumbled upon the telltale signs: a garbage bag concealed beneath branches. Within it lay the heartbreaking evidence. Joanne's body wrapped in plastic, a tragic confirmation of the family's worst fears. March 24th marked the end of a harrowing ordeal for Joanne's family, bringing closure to their anguished search, while cementing the grim reality they had dreaded all along. Paul's facade of strength hid a dark history of sexual violence against women, a chilling truth kept hidden from Joanne's family and the public until the trial. During his time working as a security guard at the club, he ominously referred to himself as a psychopath, sending shivers down the spines of those who knew him. Witnesses familiar with Paul from the gym recounted instances where he instigated fights in clubs and bars, painting a disturbing picture of his character. As the trial unfolded, more unsettling details emerged. It was revealed that Paul had been experimenting with steroids in a misguided attempt to sculpt his physique into that of a bodybuilder. His friends disclosed that he had battled alcoholism in the past, and his violent outbursts were likely exacerbated by his steroid use. Paul's educational background provided little insight into the darkness lurking beneath his seemingly ordinary facade. He attended Sydney Smith School before enrolling at Howell College, where he successfully completed a program in constructional engineering. Despite his academic achievements, Paul's journey took a sinister turn when he pursued a degree in horticulture at Bishop Burton College, completing it at the tender age of 17. These revelations painted a chilling portrait of a man whose outward appearance belied the deep-seated demons lurking within. Paul's transformation from a seemingly ordinary student to a perpetrator of unspeakable violence left Joanne's family and the community reeling, grappling with the horrifying reality of the darkness that dwelled within him. Paul's journey through life took him from Saudi Arabia to Somerton Road, where he worked diligently in various industries alongside his father, Peter Dyson. Together, they navigated the maintenance industry, honed their gardening skills, and delved into the intricacies of machining. Paul's employment history painted a picture of a young man eager to carve out his path in the world of work. However, behind the veneer of normalcy lurked a disturbing truth. At the tender age of 15, Paul's life took a dark turn when he crossed paths with Colin Allen, a martial arts expert with whom he formed an unlikely bond. It was to Colin that Paul confessed to a heinous crime, a confession that ultimately led to his arrest. Paul's acquaintances shed light on his complex character. While some saw him as charming and attractive to women, others witnessed a more troubling side to his personality. He often leveraged his position as a security guard to forge connections with women from higher social echelons, revealing a distorted perception of himself and his interactions. Colleagues and relatives offered contrasting portraits of Paul, depicting him as both outspoken and boastful about his athletic prowess, yet also capable of making disturbing statements. Shockingly, Paul's family recounted instances where he proudly boasted about his father's involvement in the deaths of 2 individuals. This seemingly incredulous claim, however, proved to be rooted in reality. Paul's father, Peter Dyson, had indeed served time in prison for the manslaughter of 22-year-old John Dickinson, a man with whom his wife had been unfaithful. The tragic events of 1967 cast a shadow over Paul's upbringing, exposing him to the grim realities of life and death at a young age. Through Paul's tumultuous journey, a complex and unsettling portrait emerged, revealing the interplay between family history, personal choices, and the darkest depths of human nature. In 1974, a mere 2 days after Paul entered the world, tragedy struck with haunting consequences. Peter Dyson, his father, found himself entangled in a fatal accident. Behind the wheel, he collided with 47-year-old Gordon Kell, who was returning home after jubilantly celebrating a silver wedding anniversary. In a chilling turn of events, Peter fled the scene, leaving Gordon to perish on the roadside. Despite the gravity of the situation, Paul idolized his father, viewing him through a lens of admiration and heroism. The untimely demise of Peter in 2000, succumbing to a heart attack in the midst of their life in Saudi Arabia, left an indelible mark on Paul's psyche. It cast a shadow over his existence, shaping the trajectory of his fate in ways both profound and ominous. As the trial unfolded on November 7, 2005, a hushed courtroom bore witness to a startling revelation. Paul, in a dramatic turn of events, stunned onlookers by entering a guilty plea. Joanne's family, bracing themselves for a protracted and grueling legal battle, found themselves thrust into a realm of disbelief and uncertainty. In a moment of collective astonishment, they whispered affirmations as Paul's admission reverberated through the chamber. Throughout the proceedings, Paul maintained a stoic demeanor, his gaze fixed straight ahead or cast downward, deliberately avoiding the piercing stares of Joanne's grieving loved ones and the scrutiny of law enforcement. Not a flicker of emotion crossed his impassive countenance, not even during the formal announcement of the charges against him. His lawyer, Harry Barrell, stood before the court, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. With unwavering resolve, he conceded that there could be no excuse for the heinous act perpetrated by his client. In the wake of Paul's shocking confession, a pall of solemnity descended upon the courtroom, marking the beginning of a harrowing journey toward justice and closure. On Tuesday, November 8th, nearly 10 months after the tragic murder, Paul received his sentence, life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. Remarkably, just 14 years later, in November 2019, at the age of 45, Paul found himself transferred to an open prison and recommended for day release. The parole board cited Paul's active engagement in self-awareness programs and successful completion of an intensive interpersonal relationship improvement program. Recalling the day of Joanne's disappearance, Katie was struck by Paul's behavior. She now regrets offering him comfort when he appeared at her doorstep. Later, when Paul wandered off, Katie, consumed by worry, searched for him. Finding him at the bus stop, she squeezed his hands in an attempt to provide support as he sat there, overcome with emotion. She even embraced him, hoping to offer solace. Reflecting on the moment, admitted she hadn't initially noticed the scratches on his arm. But upon later reflection, she couldn't forgive herself for missing them. The easing of Paul's detention conditions and the prospect of day release stirred deep emotional turmoil within Joanne's family. Katie, speaking to the media, expressed their sense of loss and confusion in the face of this news. Paul's impending release dredged up painful memories of Joanne's untimely death, leaving the family grappling with a sense of injustice. Despite their belief that Paul didn't deserve such leniency for his heinous actions, 20-year-old Sophie Sergi lived in Pitkas Point, Alaska in 1993. On April 25th, she went to visit a friend of hers at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. The last time Sophie was seen was when she left her group of friends to smoke a cigarette outside. The next morning, a janitor found Sophie's body in a dormitory bathtub. She had been stabbed multiple times, shot in the back of the head, and also indecently assaulted. Investigators collected evidence from the crime scene, including male DNA from Sophie's body. They also interviewed Sophie's friends and other people that either lived in the dorm or studied at the university that might know something. Unfortunately, investigators were not able to find a substantial lead that would help them find the perpetrator. The case then went cold. In 2019, investigators decided to take another look at the case. This time, they had more advanced DNA technology to aid them. Investigators took the DNA of the unknown man that was collected from Sophie's body and submitted it into a public DNA database. They were then able to find a relative of the suspect. They believed it was his aunt that they found. She had uploaded a sample to a commercial online genealogy database. The man who they believed was responsible is 47-year-old Stephen Downs. Still, in 2019, investigators executed a search warrant at his home in Auburn, Maine. They collected a DNA sample from him. This DNA sample matched the one collected from the crime scene back in 1993. He was then promptly arrested. Downs' trial began in January of 2022. During the trial, jurors heard from people who were at the dorm on the night of the crime, forensic experts, and law enforcement. We learned that Downs was a freshman at the university in 1993 and lived in a dorm where Sophie's life was taken. Downs' friend and then roommate testified that he owned guns and a large hunting knife, including a .22 caliber pistol. An expert testified that Sophie was shot with a .22 caliber bullet. Downs did not testify at the trial, but jurors heard a recording of his conversation with investigators. He denied knowing Sophie and keeping a gun in his dorm room. In the recording, He also told police that he was with his then-girlfriend all evening when the crime took place. The girlfriend testified during the trial that Downs had left the room several times that evening. During closing statements, prosecutor Jenna Gerstein encouraged jurors to remember that Downs' DNA was found at the scene, and that the alternative suspects raised by the defense had been ruled out because their own DNA did not match any found at the scene. The jury deliberated for days before reaching a verdict on February 8, 2022. Downs was found guilty of both charges against him. Jenna Gerstein said, "We are grateful that Stephen Downs was held accountable for his actions after almost 30 years and hope that Sophie's family and the Fairbanks community as a whole are able to obtain some closure." In light of this verdict, Downs' attorney, James Hownick, said that Downs and his team of defense lawyers were disappointed by the verdict and that there would likely be an appeal. "It was a very emotional and difficult case," he said. "Obviously, we continue to believe in the innocence of our client, but we also respect the process and we respect the jury's verdict." Hownick said questions about the genetic genealogy will likely be erased on appeal. The science is relatively new, and Downs is the first man in Alaska to stand trial for a charge that resulted from genetic genealogy. The science is controversial when used by law enforcement because it could infringe on constitutional rights, Hownick said. "A lot of people across the country are watching this case and wondering whether it's going to go up to the Supreme Court, and this could be the opportunity to litigate that," he said. "So we'll see." Downs is being held without bail at the Fairbanks Correctional Center and is scheduled to be sentenced in September. He faces a maximum prison sentence of 129 years. 9-year-old Maurice Chivarella lived with her family in Hazleton, Pennsylvania in 1964. On March 18th, Maurice left her Hazleton home early to deliver canned goods to a nun before attending class at St. Joseph's Parochial School. Sometime during her half-mile walk, Maurice disappeared. When she was marked absent from school and did not return home for lunch like she normally would, her family called the police to report her missing. That afternoon, Maurice's body was discovered 2 miles away from her house, in a strip mining pit near the Hazleton Municipal Airport. Her wrists and ankles were bound by her own shoelaces and her scarf was stuffed in her mouth. She had been indecently assaulted and strangled. Investigators collected DNA belonging to an unknown man from the crime scene. It was collected so that it could be used later. In 2007, investigators used a DNA sample to create a DNA profile of the suspect. It was submitted into the combined DNA index system, but no matches could be made, unfortunately. Investigators did not give up, and every month they would compare the DNA profile to the new entries in the database. In 2019, their persistence finally matched the distant relative of the suspect. From 2019 to 2021, authorities conducted numerous interviews and collected DNA samples from this family. The samples helped narrow in on 4 suspects, but one of them caught investigators' attention because of his criminal history. That person was James Paul Forte. He was not part of the initial investigation in 1964. They noticed that he had passed away in 1980 due to natural causes at the age of 38. With the assistance of the Luzerne County District's Attorney's Office, investigators exhumed Forte's body to obtain his DNA sample. After some more DNA testing, they were able to confirm in February of 2022 he was responsible for taking Marissa's life. Chance of another person having this same profile is 1 in 480 septillion. Police stated Forte was arrested in Hazleton back in 1974 on similar charges with a different victim. He was later arrested in 1978 for reckless endangerment and harassment. Police said it may not have been the only crime Forte committed and asked anyone with information to come forward. Marie Chivarella's case was the oldest cold case in Pennsylvania, and the 4th oldest case in America to be solved with genetic genealogy, authorities said. Maurice's brother, Ronald Civarella, attended the press conference and had this to say, "Now that we know the individual, it gives us a sense of closure. Not full closure, we'll never have that, but a sense of closure that we know the individual that did it, and that the individual isn't out committing the same crime and hurting other young girls like Maurice." Forte lived 6 or 7 blocks away from the Chivarellas. Authorities stated relatives did not know Forte and believed the attack was random. Today, Marisy and Chivarella would be 67 years old. This here story is about 26-year-old Elle Edwards. On Christmas Eve 2022, she was celebrating with her friends in a pub in Alley Village, Liverpool, UK. The gal was real vibrant and beautiful. She worked as a cosmetologist in a local beauty salon and was also an assistant to a dermatologist. Elle was naturally positive and mighty kind, which allowed her to win over even the most demanding clients. Elle was pretty and had become an excellent specialist in her fields. The gal was cheerful and always smilin', but at the same time, she remained determined, constantly moving towards her goals and dreams. On December 24th, G22, her sister Lucy flew in from Dubai to spend the holidays with the family, and Elle eagerly awaited her return. They decided to celebrate this long-awaited event in style. So the girls and their friends headed to the local pub. Here they had a great time, laughing a lot, dancing and singing karaoke. In the merry atmosphere, no one noticed that a person whom kindness was alien, was nearby. Around 11:50 p.m., an emergency call came in. As they were exiling the pub, no less than 12 shots were fired, and 2 of them hit Elle. She suffered a gunshot wound to the head that proved to be mighty serious. The dispatcher directed emergency services to the same. They urgent-like arrived at the pub, loaded the gal into an ambulance, and took her to the local hospital. However, she died on the way, as her injuries was incompatible with life. When the police informed the victim's family about the tragedy, there was in a state of shock. No one believed it, and no one understood how this could have happened to her. No one suspected that this beautiful and cheerful girl could have had deadly enemies. In the early stages of the investigation, the detectives had no leads. The assailant had attacked unexpected-like and disappeared Chasters mysteriously, leaving only a shelled Cassoin and the bleeding victim at the crime scene. The attack was sudden but well-planned and gave Elle no chance of survival. But was the gal the true target of the attack, or did she become a random victim of a madman? An unknown car stopped near the pub entrance, and minutes later the shooting started. In addition to the deceased, 4 other men received gunshot wounds of varying severity, all of them young people aged 22 to 33 who was spending the evening in the establishment and lived in the nearby towns. Initially, the police were inclined to believe that the murdered woman was a random victim. It was known that criminal gangs were operating in the area periodically. The shooting was likely to routine showdown between their members. However, all of this was just conjecture, which would have to be proven or disproved in the course of the investigation. So the detectives delved deeper into the victim's personality, like the witnesses to the crime. The victim's relatives were at a loss as to who could have wanted Elle's death, as the girls seemed to have no ill wishes or enemies capable of such horrors. The detectives decided to interview other witnesses and the victims of the unknown criminal's gunfire. In addition, law enforcement officers requested the pub owner's video surveillance recordings. It would be necessary to talk to dozens of people and analyze several hours of video recordings. Several police officers were working on the extensive investigation. It was necessary to answer several difficult questions. There were too many victims of the attack. But was this spontaneous aggression? Or did the perpetrator pursue a specific target? All witnesses to the incident were interrogated. However, checking mobile communications data took more time. The media were notified to assist in the investigation. Law enforcement officers urged anyone with valuable information to come to the police station. First and foremost, this concerned possible video recordings made by random eyewitnesses, on any of which the car in which the aggressor arrived might appear. After the crime, the police held a meeting with local residents. The purpose of this communication was to persuade people possessing valuable information to share it with law enforcement officers. It was assumed that someone might have seen the moment of the attack or know the criminal. People were urged not to be afraid of the criminals and the local feuding clans. Community leaders supported local residents during this difficult time. In addition to the conversations, activists went door to door and communicated with the neighbors. Special trained officers worked with the family of the deceased. They gall-beamed to provide them with support in connection with the heavy loss. In the course of this work, it was established that the perpetrator had left the pub parking lot in a dark-colored car. Eyewitness accounts regarding it make different. It was dark, and it was difficult to make out anything. But the most likely was a dark Mercedes-Benz class. Later, this was confirmed after checking the outdoor surveillance cameras. The killer did not immediately open fire, drive up to the parking lot, and observe the pub visitors for some time. He sat in the car so that he could freely see the entrance and most of what was happening inside. Apparently, he was choosing the most convenient moment for the attack. After a few minutes of surveillance, when Al came out, the criminal quickly got out of the car, fired 12 shots, then instantly got back behind the wheel and disappeared. Investigators, after studying the recordings, made an important conclusion. The attacker was a lion. No one helped him. It was not possible to trace the exact location where the perpetrator fled. Therefore, the detectives went door to all local residents, describing the car and recounting the circumstances of the incident, trying to establish the identity of the killer. Patrolling the streets was carried out around the clock, and this yielded results. Just 2 days after the shooting, detectives detained 2 suspects, but no names were mentioned until all the circumstances were clarified. However, it was not possible to prove their involvement in the crime, in particular because the murder weapon was not found. After that, the detectives made a statement to the public, saying that they would not rest until the unknown shooter was punished. All this was intended to calm the local residents, who were outraged by the rampant crime and the powerlessness of the authorities. It was also assumed that the attack had been provoked by a feud between local gangs. In this case, L would be considered a random victim. However, all this was also just an assumption that remained to be verified. In the course of the investigation, it was possible to establish that the potential targets could have been Jake Dudley and Kieram Seld, members of the local Beechwood gang, who was spending the evening in the pub. It became known that they had been in long-term, fierce conflict with another group claiming this territory. On December 29th, the police arrested another person, but he was not the one who opened fire. The suspect had a solid alibi that excluded him from the list of suspects. However, the detective suspected that he had participated in the setup for the attack. Around the same time, the dark Mercedes car in which the killer had left the pub parking lot was identified. But due to the lack of direct evidence, the name of the third suspect was also not disclosed. There were some difficulties with the found car. The car was traced through video surveillance systems and identified thanks to the cameras. But law enforcement officers were too late. On December 31st, the police department received the report that the fire had started near the scene of the shooting. When the special services arrived at the scene, they found a darkness fading similar to the perpetrator's vehicle, which was engulfed in flames. The vehicle was completely burned out. Valuable evidence was lost in the flames. The perpetrators clearly knew that the police were on their trail, so they decided to destroy one of the direct pieces of evidence, despite the fact that the fire did not completely destroy the car. It was confirmed that it had been used during the shooting. However, the Mercedes did not belong to the perpetrators, but had been stolen shortly before the attack. Presumably, the arson was committed intentionally to complicate the investigation after the murder of competitors. On January 11th, 2 more suspects, a 22-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman, were delivered to the police department. They were arrested in Central Wales. The man's name was Connor Chapman. He was well known to the police. He had an extensive criminal record that he had accumulated over the past 5 years before the murder of L. Idweiser. Connor had started with daring lawbreakings and gradually sank deeper into the abyss of crime. One of his first serious crimes was a car theft under aggravating circumstances. He had repeatedly become a suspect in robberies, hooliganism, and threatening behavior. Once the young man was involved in a chase with the police, after which he abandoned the car and hid in the bushes nearby. When they detained him, the criminal said that he did not understand what chase they were talking about and that he was here just waiting for a friend. In this case, he became the real star. The detainee's data ended up in newspaper headlines. Carla Chapman was from Birkenhead, Liverpool. His parents had left him at an early age, so his grandparents had formalized guardianship. It was in a house that the hero of the story moved. The teenager dropped out of high school shortly before the exams. In general, he studied poorly and no special hopes were pinned on him. He was always considered a problem child. The young hooligan first became a defendant in a court case in 2014, when he was 14 years old. Connor was accused of shoplifting. As early as 2016, he committed another crime. His involvement in the theft of a car was proven when the young man was detained in a stolen vehicle. He did not have a driver's license or insurance, which was a violation of the terms of his suspended sentence. In 2017, high theft was added to the storage of prohibited substances. During this period, he was also under police supervision, so he had again violated the restraining order. As a result, he was banned from accessing several parts of the city. Connor was not allowed to appear in public places, as he clearly posed a threat to society. However, as early as 2019, he violated the ban again. The patrol detained him in a public place. The young man had a knife and prohibited substances with him. In the same year, the general public first heard about Connor Chapman. He appeared on the pages of the local newspaper after an unsuccessful attempt to escape from the police in a stolen car. The city patrol noticed a stolen Audi on the streets and ordered the driver to stop and get out of the car with his hands up. However, the 18-year-old Chapman did not obey, provoking a chase. During the short flight, Connor committed a large number of traffic violations. In particular, he accelerated to more than 80 kilometers per hour in areas with a 30 kilometers limit. Tana repeatedly drove into oncoming traffic and in the end crashed into the curb. A speed car was thrown aside and turned around. The driver could not continue the orgy, so he got out of the car and ran away. However, even here he was unlucky, as the patrol caught up with him in the bushes just a few hundred meters away. In his defense, the young man said that he was waiting here for a friend. But the deception was obvious. The lawyer of Connor explained in court that his client had fallen under the influence of a bad company of Alda Phrase. The court left him unpunished and the need to release the budding criminal. He was found to have attention deficit disorder and a number of other disorders identified by private specialists during the trial. Despite this, due to numerous violations and potentially dangerous behavior on the road, he was sentenced to a term of up to 8 months in prison for 2 monies. The young man also received a ban on driving a car, which was in effect after his release. Thus, the budding criminal had achieved 14 convictions for 30 criminal episodes by the time he reached adulthood. It was obvious that he had no intention of changing and categorically refused to fit into society. Everyone understood that he was potentially dangerous, but legal grounds for isolating him from society had not been found. This was due to the fact that so far no person had been seriously injured by his inadequate behavior. The public was outraged by the powerlessness of the authorities. Everything was shaping up so that the criminal elements could do nothing until they kill or maim innocent people. And that's how it turned out. In January 2020, the court again sentenced Connor Chapman, this time to 10 months in prison. He was again caught in a public place with a cold weapon and substances in his pocket, a whole bouquet of prohibitive lists. During this period, the police openly appeared on TV channels, urging the public to beware of this young man. After serving his sentence, protected months, he again got involved in crime and was wanted for at least 5 criminal episodes. When he was caught, the young criminal said that he had spent more time behind bars than free, and he did not seem upset about this, but rather proud of his achievements. However, Connor had no intention of stopping there. By the age of 20, his service record had expanded again. By this point, he had received 19 sentences for 43 crimes. But in the summer of 2022, the inadequate young man found himself free again. This happened just 6 months before the death of L. Edwards. During this period, Connor was again brought before the court. His lawyer tried to play on pity, telling the story that the first child of the young man was born while he was in prison. At this point, his girlfriend was pregnant with a girl. The young man claimed that he had rethought his life and wanted to get on the path of correction. Of course, these were loud, false words. The only thing he wanted was to get free and return to the path of crime. During this period, the police already knew that he was a member of one of the local criminal gangs engaged in the sale of prohibited substances. However, the criminal was tried not for these serious crimes, but for burglary and theft of 2 electric motorcycles. On December 24, 322, a skirmish broke out between two rival criminal gangs. They began to argue over the division of the territory near the wooden church in Beechwood Estates. They failed to reach an agreement, after which the young gangster decided to take revenge. He armed himself with a submachine gun and waited for about 3 hours until he tracked down his targets. He wanted to kill Karen Seld and Jake Duffy, who had gone to the Moyak pub for rest. Shortly before midnight, the criminal drove up to the parking lot and began to observe. He identified his victims and waited for the right moment to attack, then ran out of a car and fired 12 bullets into the building. He managed to seriously injure Duffy, but despite the threat to his life, he survived the attack. However, the unlucky Elle Edwards, who was not so fortunate, 2 bullets hit her in the head. The young beauty fought for her life, but died in the arms of the medics on the way to the hospital. The girl accidentally met the killer's targets that evening, and did not even suspect that the festive revelry could end so tragically. The pub was crowded. Then 1 person was killed and 4 were wounded. One 22-year-old man was shot in the leg. A 24-year-old young man was wounded in the arm, and a 33-year-old man in the wrist. None of these injuries were life-threatening. Elle's friends tried to provide her with assistance and perform artificial respiration right on the spot. However, this was not enough to save her life. Elle's sister, Lucy, was much like Dear. She lived in Dubai and flew home to celebrate Christmas with her family. Just minutes before the attack, she had left the establishment, so she was not affected at all. Later, Lucy recalled how she had wanted to take her sister with her, but the girl wanted to stay with her friends. On January 25, 2023, the funeral of the young girl took place. Hundreds of concerned people came to say goodbye to the random victim of gang showdowns. The body was brought to the local church in a hearse drawn by 4 white horses. Even the pub that had become the site of the girl's last celebration was closed that day as a mark of respect for her memory. The owner of the establishment published a message of support for Elle's family on his official social media page. Connor Chapman was charged with a whole list of charges, the main one of which was murder. It became known that the perpetrator had an accomplice, namely the 20-year-old Thomas. After the arrest and during the searches, a video recording was found on this young man, which had been made shortly before the attack. In it, Connor is handing over a weapon and saying that he is going to settle accounts with someone. After the attack, they together hid the stolen Mercedes in order to get rid of it later. The murder weapon was never found. However, the killer's DNA traces were found on one of the shell casings fired. It was obvious that it was Connor who loaded the weapon before the attack. In addition, red gloves were found during searches in his house, which were clearly visible in the CCTV footage from morning. After the crime, when the perpetrators had abandoned the car, they ordered a taxi under a false name. They used the driver's services to cover their tracks and confuse the investigation. Around 5 a.m., they returned to the place where the hidden car was located. Here, the criminals tried to cover their tracks. However, something went wrong. Ultimately, they decided to get rid of the car by setting it on fire. Thomas Nord was found guilty on all charges brought against him. In July 2023, the court sentenced him to 9 years in prison. This modest sentence was due to the fact that he had not yet managed to accumulate such a wide criminal history as his accomplice. Jake and Karen were wounded in the moment of the attack, but both managed to survive the assault. A look at their lifestyle made the aggression of one of the members of the rival gangs quite understandable. Both were members of the local Beechwood gang, which was openly in conflict with another group claiming this territory. It became known that on December 23, 2023, just a day before the attack with firearms, they had already been attacked. On that occasion, another person from Connor Chapman's group had assaulted them. Both were beaten, but did not receive serious injuries. Apparently, they considered this a random fight and calmly went to relax in the pub. While the shooter awaited his sentence in the case of the murder of the innocent victim, both targets of his attack were already in prison. Curran was sentenced to 27 months in prison for an attack on members of the rival criminal group. Another 9 months were added to the sentence for the fight. His friend was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months for a similar offense. Obviously, they were trying to avenge the attempted murder. Prohibitive court orders were also issued against both of them, with a whole list of restrictions. Of course, this method did not allow protecting citizens from this gang of criminals. However, in case of further violations, more severe punishment could be applied to them due to ignoring the prescriptions. There was outraged that potentially dangerous members of criminal gangs were getting away with minimum sentences after each crime. The bans were clearly ineffective and did not contribute absolutely anything to public safety. This became especially obvious when it was found that Chapman already had a ban on visiting that region where the pub was located. But this did not prevent him from stealing a car and coming to the public place, despite the fact that he also had a driving ban. The events that had occurred once again raised the question of toughening punishments and revising the existing norms of the legal system. However, so far this flawed system has not suffered any serious changes. At the trial on the case of L's murder, Connor tried to refute that it was he who appeared on the CCTV footage. According to him, during this period he was at home, packing Christmas gifts. However, a sufficient amount of evidence was collected to expose the lie. The hearings on the case lasted 3.5 weeks, during which all the circumstances preceding the attack were revealed. It became known that the reason for the attack was only the competition between the two criminal gangs dividing the territory nearby. The defendant did not even know the victim. He simply did not care about her fate, as well as the fate of all the other innocent people in the bar. He was driven only by blind fury, which he could never control. After the attempted murder of two competitors, Connor planned to flee to Spain to cover his tracks. He used a stolen car and also got rid of the murder weapon, trying not to fall into the hands of the police. He avoided using any mode of transport. The detectives detained the criminal literally at the airport. After the arrest, Connor tried to deceive the police, claiming that the Mercedes he was seen driving on the day of the murder was not stolen. According to him, this was a common car of the criminal group, which they used for the distribution of substances. The guy claimed that he was not behind the wheel of the vehicle and also continued to convince the jury that he did not open fire that evening. He was desperately trying to get out of the situation. The defendant stated that he had only just learned that someone from the criminal group had used the vehicle for an attack on the pub. Before the jury retired to consider the verdict, the father of the innocent victim made a short speech. He sincerely hoped that the criminal would never again be able to spend Christmas with his loved ones in freedom. The jurors, consisting of Pitiation and Singention, came to a unanimous decision after 3 hours of discussion. In their opinion, Connor Chapman was guilty of all the charges brought against him. He cynically committed the crime and did not repent of the fact that he accidentally killed the beautiful 26-year-old girl. The whole life that lay ahead of her, and he took it away. Instead of remorse, the heartless Connor spent several days carefully getting rid of all the evidence and traces of the murder that could link him to this bloody event. The motive for the attack was the competition between criminal games. On July 7, 2023, Connor was sentenced. He was sent to serve a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 48 years from the start of serving the sentence. After the verdict was announced, the victim's father victoriously raised his fist. The incident provoked a wave of public outrage. The residents of the city could not feel safe, knowing that they were at the junction of the confrontation between criminal games dividing spheres of influence. They knew that these people had a large amount of firearms and were not afraid to use them, as proved by the murder of L. The girl's father said he wanted to set up a foundation to support victims like his daughter. He believed that the main goal would be to fight to reduce the number of weapons in the hands of civilians. 30-year-old Roxanne Leah Wood lived in Barron County, Michigan with her husband Terry Wood. On February 20, 1987, the two of them went bowling. They had gone with 2 separate cars and left the bowling out separately again. Roxanne was the first one to leave and go home. When Terry arrived home later, he found Roxanne's body. She was on the floor of their kitchen. Her throat had been slit. DNA belonging to the suspect was collected at the crime scene. Terry became a suspect, but investigators could not find any evidence that he was involved in any way. The DNA found at the crime scene that belonged to the suspect was not his, but DNA technology was not advanced enough to determine who it belonged to then. In 2001, the Michigan State Police 5th District Cold Case team worked on the case for more than a year, reviewing 3,347 pages of information and going through evidence. Their hard work did not lead them to a suspect, and the case went cold again. Investigators then reopened the case in 2020. In February of 2021, investigators received a tip from a credible and reliable source that 67-year-old Patrick Wayne Gillum should be looked into as a suspect. Investigators followed him around. He lived in South Bend, Indiana. In June of 2021, they collected a cigarette but with Gillum's DNA on it. State police sent the cigarette to their forensic lab in Grand Rapids, where it came back as a match to the unknown DNA found at the crime scene. Police officers then brought Gillum in to be interviewed. He denied going to Michigan other than for work. He said he only knew 2 people named Roxanne, but neither matched Roxanne Wood's description. Gillum was then shown a photo of Roxanne. He said he did not know her at all. When investigators told Gillum what had happened to Roxanne, his demeanor quickly changed. He began to breathe rapidly and his hands shook as he was holding them up. He then said he needed to talk to a lawyer and the interview was terminated. On February 17, 2022, Gillum was arrested in connection to the case at his home on East Bowman Street. An old lady who is the neighbor of Gillum said he shoveled her sidewalk after the most recent snowstorm without being asked. She offered to pay him, but he declined. The lady is surprised but said it could have been an accident what he did so many years ago. I personally would like to know how someone accidentally breaks into a home, slits someone's throat, and assaults. Gillum's bond is set at $500,000. If he posts it, he must wear a tracker and stay in a residence in Michigan. He'll appear in court for a preliminary examination. Lieutenant Chuck Christensen said, "There's relief that we have an individual arrested for this. But I can tell you that there is a lot of investigative work that will continue from this point." Christensen also said that he spoke with Roxanne's husband Terry and her family last night. He was happy and thankful that this breakthrough has been made. Additionally, he expressed relief. After this Sunday, it will be 35 years since this had happened. He is processing that as well as the rest of her family. 20-year-old Mary Jane Thompson lived in Dallas, Texas in 1984. She had previously lived in Houston and Los Angeles but decided to move to Dallas in 1983. Mary worked at a floor shop and also a restaurant. She had dreamed of becoming a model. Mary was last seen taking a bus to a medical clinic on February 11, 1984. 2 days later, her body was found behind a warehouse in Dallas. She had been strangled by her own leg warmers and also assaulted. Investigators collected DNA belonging to the culprit from the scene for it to be used later. In 2009, a DNA profile was created for the suspect, but it did not match anyone in the database and the case went cold. In 2018, Dallas police decided to reopen the case. This time, DNA was much more advanced and they worked with a team from the district attorney's office and the FBI. The DNA profile of the suspect was submitted to the public DNA databases. Then finally, in February of 2021, investigators determined that 60-year-old Edward Morgan's DNA matched the DNA collected at the crime scene back in 1984. Morgan was arrested and is currently being held at the Dallas County Jail. Dallas County Assistant District Attorney Leighton Diatone said, "Working together, we continue to solve the most difficult cold cases that Dallas has ever seen. I look forward to working with all our local law enforcement agencies to utilize the advancements in forensic testing techniques to identify, arrest, and prosecute the most dangerous predators hiding among us. We never ever forget about these cases, our victims, and their families." After the arrest, Mary's sister, Selena Tomasello, posted several messages and a montage of family photos on Facebook. "Missing you, sis. On Friday when I got a call I have been waiting 38 years for. He will be in jail for the rest of his life. He is no longer free as a bird. I know you are looking down." The case of Lisa Cecilia Hardam, the fiancée of a tyrant who turned a luxury apartment into a prison. Controlling behavior in couple relationships, unfortunately, is not uncommon and quite dangerous. It manifests itself when a person tries to subjugate and forcibly adapt their other half to their own needs through intimidation, demonstrations of strength and power, as well as humiliation and total control. often the victim because of the instilled feelings of fear and guilt, does not realize that he or she is in a destructive situation. The story of a young woman named Lisa Cecilia Hardim illustrates what a relationship with a control freak can lead to. She naively believed that she had met the love of her life, but she herself did not notice how her fiancé became a monster who turned their luxurious apartment into a real prison with 24-hour video surveillance. This case provoked an international scandal and was widely covered in the press. The unfortunate Lisa tried to make Lisa look mentally unstable and cold-blooded crime to pass off as an accident or voluntary resignation from life. However, the perpetrator, despite his money and connections, did not manage to escape responsibility. Now let's understand how her beloved man turned into a monster who hid his inhuman attitude behind care. Lisa Cecilia Hardim, biography, family, early years. Our today's heroine was born in Canada on June 12, 1981 in the suburbs of Toronto and was the second child in the family. Lisa was brought up together with her older brother Jason, with whom she has always been very close. They were raised independently by single mom, Joanna. Brother and sister did not remember their father because he left the family when the children were very young and no longer took any part in their lives. Lisa Cecilia grew up as an active and purposeful girl. From an early age, she was involved in sports. Together with her brother, went to the martial arts section, liked to play soccer and volleyball. But her main passion has always been ballet. She daily visited the dance studio where she practiced at the bar for several hours. The girl from childhood was tall and slender, but professional ballet classes required the strictest diet, which had a detrimental effect on the growing body. In adolescence, Lisa developed anorexia on the background of eating disorders. For a long time, she kept silent about her problem, believing that she could cope with everything herself. But when her weight approached critically low values, her mother sounded the alarm and put her daughter in the clinic, where Lisa needed to spend several months to restore health and weight gain. After graduating from school, the girl continued dancing classes and also decided to connect her life with the beauty industry. In parallel with her university studies, she got a job as a perfumer in one of the stores of a large cosmetics chain. And in her spare time, she studied the subtleties of makeup and hairdressing, moving to Australia. In 2005, having celebrated her 24th birthday, Lisa decided to make drastic changes in her life. She wanted to go to the other side of the world, to Australia, and there were several reasons for that. Firstly, she wanted to live in a warmer and milder climate. And secondly, Lisa wanted to see the world. She took a one-year work visa and traveled to another continent. However, with her then flew Joanna, who accompanied her daughter for the first few months to make sure that she was all right and she settled well in the new place. The mother then returned back to Toronto with peace of mind, making sure her daughter could take care of herself. Lisa settled in Sydney, where she rented a cozy apartment and soon got a job at a local small cosmetology company. After her visa expired, she decided to move to Australia permanently. First, she extended her stay for another year and then began to prepare the necessary documents to obtain citizenship of this country. Personal life. As for personal life in this respect, everything was not easy. The fact is that Lisa always preferred to meet with older men. Obviously, not the least role in this played a lack of a father in the family, so she always reached out to more mature men, looking for support and protection in them. In 2006, Lisa successfully interviewed for a job at Sydney Cosmetics and was hired. She soon began in a romantic relationship with a coworker who was almost twice her age. A few months later, they decided to start living together, and Lisa moved into the apartment of her lover. And after a couple more months, the girl introduced her boyfriend to her mom and brother, and they approved her choice. The couple traveled a lot around the world, rested in the Seychelles in Paris, and also visited the famous carnival in Rio de Janeiro. The man even made Lisa a marriage proposal, which she gladly accepted. But about a year after the engagement, the lovers broke up. Lisa did not go into detail about the reasons for this decision, but hinted that too great a difference in age, however, played in this not the least role. In 2010, Lisa graduated from the Sydney College of Stylists and got a job as a hairdresser in a popular beauty salon, where she quickly won the respect of colleagues and the trust of customers. At the same time, a new boyfriend appeared in her life, but their romance did not last long because Lisa found out that he was married. Destroy someone else's family she was not going to, so she quickly broke off the relationship. But shortly before that, at one of the parties, this guy introduced her friend, a businessman named Simon Gitney. This acquaintance turned out to be fatal for Lisa. Who is Simon Gitney? Simon was born in Maryland in December 1973 in a very religious large family of immigrants from Lebanon. He had 5 other siblings whom his parents raised in strictness and obedience. However, Simon from a young age had problems with controlling emotions and outbursts of anger. And he was also possessive, did not tolerate rejection, and often gave the will of his fists. All this eventually led to serious problems with the law. The first time Gitney was behind bars was at the age of 18, when he came to his ex-girlfriend in the store where she worked and began to openly molest her. The store owner interceded for the girl and threw the impudent man out the door, but Simon returned with friends who grabbed the store owner and held him while Simon beat him severely. At that time, the guy only served a few months and was released on bail for good behavior afterwards. But 3 years later, he was arrested again, this time on theft charges. However, Simon resisted violently, threw himself into a fight and bit off one of the policeman's earlobe. He was threatened with a serious prison sentence for this prank, but the pastor of the Lebanese Christian church, of which his entire family was members, interceded. As a result, the young man spent only a year and a half in prison. In 2000, Simon again came to the attention of the police, and this time he was arrested for possession and distribution of illegal substances. But the sentence was again extremely lenient, and he served 2 years out of the 4 assigned to him. On release, Gadami, as it seemed to everyone, took the path of correction. He moved to Sydney, where with a few friends founded a fairly successful business for the production and sale of luxury women's shoes. This business brought a stable high income, so Simon quickly became rich, acquired luxury real estate in a prestigious neighborhood, a premium class car, and carefully tried to hide from everyone his rich criminal past, from his roommates to his lovers. At that party, Simon and Lisa exchanged phone numbers, and soon he called her himself. Their relaxed communication somehow imperceptibly grew into a buddy relationship. And when in January 2010, Lisa complained that she was unhappy with her current living conditions and would like to rent an apartment in another neighborhood, Itani kindly offered her to live for free in one of the rooms of his luxurious apartment while she was looking for a suitable place to rent. Lisa accepted the offer, although her mother was somewhat alarmed by this turn of events. But Lisa convinced Joanna that it was a temporary measure and that she and Simon are just friends. By the way, she herself at that time thought that the man who so carefully monitors his appearance and adores piercings preferred to build relationships with guys. But this opinion turned out to be wrong. For the first couple of months, Gedani really kept his distance. The young people lived in separate rooms and there was not even a hint of intimacy or romance between them. But gradually they got closer, the so-called spark, and started a romance which quickly gained momentum. At the time of the beginning of their relationship, Simon was 37 years old and Lisa, 28. Simon seemed to her a beautiful prince from a fairy tale. He was sociable, cheerful, spoiled his beloved with gifts, and arranged her pleasant surprises. The couple began to appear everywhere together. In particular, they went together to an elite sports club, which Simon attended regularly for many years. Lisa was sure that finally met her true love and will live a long, happy life with the chosen one. She raved about him to her mother, brother, and friends, and had no idea that this fairy tale would soon end. An affectionate tyrant. Just 6 months after the beginning of the relationship, Simon's behavior began to change, but it happened in stages and in such a way that Lisa did not notice anything. Thinking that the lover does everything for her own good, he gradually distanced Lisa from friends and family, erased all her personal boundaries, tried to change her views, tastes, and behavior, adjusting them to his needs. In June 2010, shortly after Lisa celebrated her 29th birthday, Simon began to persistently persuade her to quit her job, claiming that she was not valued there and she could find a better paid position. But Lisa loved working at the beauty salon, where she had many regular clients and was happy with her income. so she didn't understand why she should quit her job and refuse to do so. Simon was not satisfied with the refusal, and in August of the same year, he showed up at Lisa's salon, having thrown a loud scandal, which actually forced her to write a letter of resignation. Lisa Hardim was shocked by his behavior, but Gitani assured that it would be better, and in general, she can no longer work because his income will allow them both to live comfortably. Nothing to deny themselves. A month and a half later, the couple moved into a new luxury apartment located on the 15th floor of an elite residential complex. As it later turned out, the room was literally stuffed with hidden surveillance cameras, of which Lisa, of course, did not even guess. Simon gave his beloved an expensive smartphone and laptop, pre-installed on them spyware that allowed him to track all her messages, emails, as well as listen to calls and see all of Lisa's movements. In addition, Simon gained access to her social media accounts and began to discreetly clean lists of friends, delete posts and photos at his discretion, as well as read personal correspondence. Total control. Gitani's control over Lisa increased day by day, but as an experienced manipulator, he made it look as if his girlfriend wanted to do as he told her. Gitani had invaded literally every aspect of her life, leaving no hint of privacy. He forbade Lisa to use cosmetics, claiming that she does too bright makeup, which makes her look vulgar. He also bought her clothes and unsightly clothes in gray and black colors, and all her outfits simply threw away, arguing that they were too revealing, and men would stare at her. From the apartment, Lisa went out only accompanied by her lover. They visited together only those places that he himself chose. Simon even forbade her to visit the gym. Instead, he bought several expensive exercise machines, saying that now she could train at home. Lisa's social media friend lists were dwindling by the day, and eventually, Gitani convinced her to delete the accounts. Lisa also had no friends left in real life, and all her contacts and calls were closely monitored. Simon only allowed her to communicate with her mother and brother. Last trip home. In December 2010, Lisa decided to fly to Canada to celebrate Christmas with her family. Simon was going to fly with her, but at the last moment, his plans were disrupted because of urgent business matters. He didn't plan to let his friend go alone, but she literally begged him because she hadn't seen her mom and brother for over a year. In the end, he agreed but set strict conditions and rules which she had to strictly follow. Jason and Joanna were shocked at the changes that had happened to Lisa over the past year. She was nothing like the bright and cheerful beauty she had been before. She had literally become her own shadow. There was not a drop of makeup on her face. Her luxurious hair was pulled into a ponytail and hidden under a headdress. Her clothes were baggy, unattractive, and completely black. But it wasn't even the outward changes that were the most frightening. Lisa flinched every time the phone rang and instantly grabbed the receiver. It was one of Simon's conditions. She had to answer immediately at any time of day, no matter what she was doing at that moment. Lisa stayed at her mother's house all the time, refused to see her friends, and hardly ever went out. Joanna was alarmed and frightened by this behavior of her daughter, and she decided to have a heart-to-heart talk with her. Then Lisa burst into tears and admitted that Simon always knows where she is, with whom she communicates, and what she talks about on the phone. Lisa also revealed that Simon doesn't allow her to work, see her friends, go to the gym, or have any hobbies. In fact, she had no friends left at all. Her mother was shocked. She began to persuade her daughter to stay in Canada because in Australia she has nothing to keep her. But Lisa said that she loved Simon and did not want to break off the relationship with him. Lisa was sure that this is just a transitional period in their relationship because they have been together for less than a year and soon he will calm down and loosen his grip. She also added that her lover cares about her and wishes her only good. Despite pleas from her family to stay and attempts to convince Lisa that the relationship was unhealthy, she decided to move back to Australia to stay with Gitani. Lisa reassured her mother, saying that there was nothing to worry about and that Simon loved her and would not hurt her. Prisoner. After Lisa returned, the situation only got worse. Simon forbade her to leave the apartment, and if they went out together, she had to look only at her feet so as not to meet the eyes of other men. Moreover, Simon began to call Lisa by her second name, Cecilia, because it seemed more decent to him. In the spring of 2011, Lisa began to complain of pain in her leg. It was an old injury received in his youth during ballet classes. But instead of taking her to the hospital, Yatani hired a female physical therapist who came to their home 3 times a week to give her massages. She soon became Lisa's only friend and confidant, to whom Lisa spoke candidly about the difficult situation she found herself in. On June 12th, for Lisa's 30th birthday, Simon decided to throw a party at the most expensive restaurant in Sydney. But among the guests were only Simon's relatives and people from his inner circle. Lisa, on her own birthday, boyfriend did not allow to invite anyone. At the end of the evening, Simon proposed to Lisa by putting a ring on her finger. Hardim responded with consent and then cried. But all present noticed that these were not tears of joy, but rather tears of despair and hopelessness. Back home, Lisa called her mother and informed her of her engagement, sobbing into the phone. But Joanna was not at all happy about it. She began to persuade her daughter to leave this man and, as soon as possible, to return home to Canada. In response, Lisa only asked her mother never to start such conversations on the phone. At that moment, she already realized that the fiancé was listening to the calls, although she did not know for sure. Escape planned for a while, Lisa tried to distract herself with thoughts of the upcoming wedding and began planning the festivities. When she decided to consult with Simon about something related to the event, he rudely cut her off and told her that he would choose the place, by her address, and make the guest list. Lisa was utterly crushed, for she had no say even here. During another visit to the physiotherapist, Lisa admitted that she couldn't go on like this, but she couldn't leave because her fiancé wouldn't let her go. Together, they developed a plan according to which Lisa, at each visit of the masseuse, gave her some of her belongings for safekeeping, but did everything so that Simon did not notice anything. On July 28th, Simon left his laptop at home in a hurry, which he usually carried with him everywhere. Lisa took advantage of this and looked into it, and her worst fears were realized. There she found a spyware program with the help of which the fiancé received all the data from her phone, as well as numerous recordings of her conversations with her mother. But the most horrifying discovery was the surveillance footage from the security cameras located in every room of their apartment. That same day, Lisa, using her physical therapist's phone, called her mother and asked her to come on the next flight to her apartment and take her home. However, Joanna could not leave work so quickly. She needed time to ask for an excuse to switch shifts with one of her colleagues. Afterwards, the woman could never forgive herself for this delay. Back home, Simon immediately realized that his fiancée had taken his laptop and seen the spyware. Lisa cried, trying to figure out why she deserved to be treated that way. But Simon only pointed out that he'd done it for her own good. Accident or murder? The next day, July 29th, a serious conversation took place between the young people, the recording of which was later presented in court. Lisa was in tears and asked to go home, but Katani calmly and confidently said that this would never happen, asked Lisa to calm down and claim that she had mental problems. On the morning of July 30th, 2011, Lisa got up early, got fully dressed and put her documents and essentials in her purse. She locked herself in the bathroom and called her mother one last time, telling her that if anything happened to her, it would be Simon's fault. Apparently, Lisa wanted to leave the apartment unnoticed while her fiancé slept, but she failed. What happened next can only be guessed. According to neighbors, they heard a scream in the hallway, but did not have time to react because all abruptly hushed. And exactly a minute later, a young woman fell from the balcony of the 15th floor, crashing to her death. Several passers-by on the street also heard the scream and saw a body falling from a height, but did not have time to realize what was happening. According to a guy who was walking his dog that morning and was closest to the scene, he heard a noise and looked up. The eyewitness saw a man holding something large, which he then threw down. When passers-by came to the place of the fall, they saw a young woman lying on the ground. But all attempts to help her were in vain, as she died instantly, having received extensive injuries. 3 minutes later, Katani, dressed in his pajamas, ran out into the street. He was crying, saying he didn't know how he was going to live his life and claiming that he hadn't caught his fiancée in time. At first glance, it looked like an accident, But Simon himself was quick to claim that his fiancée had voluntarily passed away. A note in his pocket and a frightening video. Strange things began as soon as the body was taken to the morgue and examined. In different pockets were found fragments of a note torn into small pieces with the text, "There are cameras everywhere in the apartment." Probably Lisa was afraid that Simon might find the message, so she turned the note into a kind of garbage and scattered it in different pockets. A check showed that there were indeed a lot of cameras in the apartment, but the hard disk with recordings could not be found. And Simon claimed that there was no video recording at all. A surveillance camera in the communal hallway, on the other hand, captured something frightening. The short clip shows Lisa running out of the apartment and calling for help, but her fiancé grabs her from behind, covers her mouth, and drags her back in. This happened a minute before she fell off the balcony, and it was this scream that the neighbors heard. And Gattani's laptop was found to contain a recording of a conversation he and Lisa had the night before the tragedy, as well as spyware that Simon used to spy on his fiancée. According to Simon, he and Lisa had an argument that morning, and she became hysterical. She ran out into the hallway screaming, but he brought her back because he didn't want to put on a show for the neighbors. In the apartment, he picked up the phone to call her mother. But Lisa ran out to the balcony at that moment and threw herself down, and he ran after her but did not catch her in time. He claimed that she had threatened to take her own life before, but he didn't take her words seriously. But Gattani attributed the spy program to his concern for his fiancée's safety. Trial and sentencing. In the course of the trial, Simon was accompanied by already a new pasta, 22-year-old model Rachel Louise, who was just incredibly similar to his dead fiancée. However, later it was said that the girl just wanted to become famous at the expense of this high-profile case and therefore willingly talked to the press and appeared on television, saying that Gattani would never raise his hand on a woman. Simon's lawyers tried to convince the court that Lisa suffered from a mental disorder, was prone to hysterics, and could have voluntarily passed away. Even a long history of anorexia and treatment in a clinic came up. The defense also argued that the defendant, being short in stature, simply could not physically lift Lisa, who was taller than him, and also could not throw her off the balcony. But this version was refuted by a trainer from the gym, which Simon had attended regularly for many years. According to the trainer, the defendant worked with heavy weights, was much stronger than he appeared outwardly, and could easily have lifted Lisa. This was also supported by the absence of Lisa's fingerprints on the railing and the glass barrier, as she could not have jumped without leaning on them. Also testifying in court was the physiotherapist to whom Lisa had told in detail everything that had happened to her and had given her her belongings in the hope of escaping from the tyrant. It was her testimony that was decisive. Gattani was found guilty of murdering his fiancée and sentenced to 26 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 years. After the verdict was announced, Rachel Louise threw a tantrum and began to insult the judge, for which she was removed from the room. All attempts by Simon and his lawyers to challenge the court's decision were rejected, and the verdict remained in force. Rachel soon dumped her boyfriend, saying in an interview that it was difficult for them to maintain a relationship in prison, but she remains convinced of his innocence. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.